The Maple Leafs close out the Western road trip with a loss in Vancouver, but let's evaluate where things are at with the Buds at the Four Nations break. You're listening to the Locked On Leafs podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. It's your team every day.
You're Locked On Maple Leafs, your daily podcast on the Toronto Maple Leafs, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
Hello and welcome into the Locked On Leafs podcast, a daily Maple Leaf-centric podcast hosted by myself, Mike DiStefano, and my co-host, Dave Morassutti. Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Right now, new FanDuel customers can get $150 in bonus bets if your first $5 bet wins. What's going on, Dave? Did you have any luck on FanDuel yesterday at the Super Bowl?
Came close, but no cigar.
No, nothing. I started out with a bag. I took the tails on the coin toss. That hit. Had a couple more plays hit. How you feeling as a resident Dallas Cowboys fan to see the Philadelphia Eagles reign supreme?
It's like watching actually, I never watched the Montreal Canadiens win the Stanley Cup, but it's watching one of your biggest rivals just go on win a championship. Gross.
You mean like when Boston goes ahead and gets to
a
final?
That's probably a good one. Boston winning. It's probably the closest I've seen a rival in another city.
What's there was a stretch which I guess got eliminated last year, but there was like a stretch of like 5 or 6 years in a row where whatever team eliminated the Maple Leafs went on to the Stanley Cup final. Like whether it was Boston, Montreal that year, right? You ended up having Tampa, the Lightning went on, and then the Panthers went on, and then last year I guess Boston gets booted in the second round to kind of snap that skid. But
technically, the Blue Jackets didn't eliminate the Leafs from the playoffs. It was like that play into the playoffs. Didn't count. But Boston 2019.
Yeah, exactly. But congrats to the Eagles. Yeah, I think mostly everyone who weren't Cowboys fans or Chiefs fans were pulling for the Eagles in that one. And man, they really, really kicked the Chiefs right in the junk. They bullied them at the point of attack from start to finish. And that was a convincing Super Bowl victory for the Philadelphia Eagles. So congratulations to the Eagles and all Eagles Nation out there on your championship. You know, one day, hopefully Leafs Nation can celebrate a title like that, a championship win. Now, I know the Eagles had, it's their second championship in 8 years, 7 years, something like that. Like they've won before. It was the Nick Foles game. We all remember that, pre-COVID days, but we all remember that. So they've got 2 championships in the last decade. Maple Leafs looking for their first in 5-6 decades. It's coming up on 60 years, dude. It's wild how long it's been since the Leafs have won a Stanley Cup. Why don't we kind of break down where the Leafs are at this point? Because they just went into Vancouver. They were riding a high. They had won the 3 out of 4 games on the road trip, hoping to make it a perfect sweep of the Western road trip to finish things up before the Four Nations break. Did not happen. Looks like they may have kind of already mailed it in. The Canucks kind of took it to them in Vancouver. Toronto fell 2-1 in that loss to Vancouver. I guess before we kind of break down the first half of the season as a whole, really quickly, what were your thoughts on the game Saturday night, Dave?
I had no expectation of the Leafs going in and winning that game. Like, I spent a good part of the preview episode just talking about how the Leafs stink in Vancouver. Also,
they haven't won a game in Vancouver since 2019.
Yeah.
Crazy.
Yeah. Shout out Canadian Ranger in our Discord for putting money on the Leafs because, why? He just threw away. We blamed him. Like, he was like, if they lose, you can blame me. I'm like, well, I think it'll be more than just you putting them on Pro Line for them losing that game.
FanDuel. He did it on FanDuel. We know it was FanDuel. Relax there.
Oh yeah. Sorry. Yes. On FanDuel. I I did not put any money on Leafs on FanDuel. I had made some other bets that night that actually cashed, unlike the Leafs offense, which
yeah, not a good one. Not a good one. You get one from Mo, which is nice. It's been a while since we've gotten a Morgan Riley goal, and goals from the back end extremely hard to come by. Toronto ranks dead last in goals from the blue line.
Last.
Like brutally last. Yeah, like goals from the blue line. And I think it's 12 now with that Morgan Riley tally. So which is still not great. I think the next best is like 14 or 15 or something. But yeah, like that's it.
Double. I think Utah was second on the list, and they are Seattle or Utah are like near 30.
No, it's not that. It's not that big of a discrepancy. No shot. I think like Ottawa's near the bottom, and they've got like 14 or 15. Yeah, it's not that big of a difference between. The top team might have double, maybe. But the team that sits like 31st, which a couple weeks ago was Ottawa, only had like 13 goals. So I don't think that's the case. But regardless, the Leafs do need to find a way in the second half of the season to start scoring. It's nice when they get one, and they did, but no one else could find the back of the net. And there's two different goalies for Vancouver. They couldn't beat Thatcher Demko, and they couldn't beat Kevin Lankinen when he came in. Both goalies played pretty well, but it really just seemed like Toronto to me was already thinking about Cabo, already thinking about the Four Nations tournament. They didn't start off very well. The first couple of minutes, I suppose, they came out, but the first period, they got absolutely rocked, spent the entire first or like final 10, 15 minutes of the first in their own end, just getting peppered with shots. I think Joseph Woll was probably the only one who really came to play that night. I thought he was great, but outside of Joey Woll, really wasn't a crisp performance, not like we had seen on the rest of the road trip.
No, like the first goal, you just gave them so much momentum off that first goal because Matthew Nyes didn't account for Philip Hronek just skating down to the net, and like that was tough to watch that because Pettersson. It's funny. I was talking to some friends of mine who are Canucks fans. Like, yeah, Pettersson only shows up right now when it's against the Leafs. It's kind of hilarious. Like heads up play by him, but it's just like, how do you let Philip Hronek beat you backdoor, guys? Like that's just, you can't let that happen. And what annoyed me the most though is you have a Vancouver team right now that's not playing to its potential, and Thatcher Demko goes down with an injury, and that didn't change anything. Like, I'm sorry, Thatcher Demko to Kevin Lankinen is a bit of a drop off. Right, in terms of talent.
Lankinen's had a really good season, and actually Lankinen's been the better goalie of the two this year. So to be fair, it's not a lot of teams have been able to solve Kevin Lankinen. He's had a pretty good season.
I mean, Demko was just coming off of like a really good performance against Colorado. We shut him out.
But the thing that I think is a little more concerning is the fact that it's not the fact that Demko went out; it's the fact that there was also no Quinn Hughes, and you still couldn't muster up any offense. It's not even like they had a lot of chances either. I think expected goals was like 1.79, expected goals at 5-on-5. Like it really wasn't much in terms of generation for the Maple Leafs either. It's because they didn't spend a lot of time in the offense. They had 4 high danger chances at 5-on-5 throughout the whole game. Like there just wasn't a whole lot going on. They had already mailed it in and were thinking about vacation and Four Nations. And look, I think ultimately you look at the road trip, they went 3-1. They picked up 6 of 8 points. If I would have asked you last week after, they were getting crushed and only scoring a goal a game on home ice before they won the road trip, would you take 6 points, 6 out of 8? And you go 3-1 on the road trip, you'd have signed off on it. So I think maybe it was a scheduled loss at that point for that team, whereas it meant a little more to Vancouver to end to go out on the break on a positive for them.
Yeah. What also annoyed me too is that you look at the players who, if you're looking at the stats in the game 5-on-5, Austin Matthews, not a good night for him. Like he was on the ice for 4 high danger chances against, 0 high danger chances for.
Yeah, I would imagine coming out of the break, we'll see the lines kind of get shuffled up again because, the night before, even the game in Calgary, Seattle,
Yeah.
Everybody didn't love what that team did. Didn't love, the fact that that second line of Nylander, Marner, and Tavares didn't love what they did. And I think you could say very similar things about the whole lineup in Vancouver. Just wasn't much going on. You give them this break, and then they come back. You can maybe try and get Matthews and Marner back together and see if you can get things cooking again.
And they did change that during the game. Like they put Matthews and Marner.
Yeah, for sure. There's, they're changing up the lines and adjusting as they have to. But at that point, the game was shot. There wasn't anything going on in the game. But in terms of the positives, I think Joseph Woll, he came to play. He played really well, which is good to see, considering he got the night off on Thursday and still was able to bounce back with a solid performance after being off for 5-6 days. So that was definitely good to see, I thought. All right, why don't we take a break? Let's come back and let's take a look at the Leafs as a whole to this point in the season. It's kind of a big milestone mark on the calendar at the Four Nations tournament. So we'll see where the Leafs are, where they stack, and some positives and negative storylines so far to this point in the season. So we'll get to all that and more coming up next here on the Locked On Leafs podcast. Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. When the game tips off, the NHL action is getting started, and there's no better place to get in on it than on FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. With FanDuel, you can place live bets throughout the game, so even if you miss the opening face-off or you want to bet on a fourth quarter, third period comeback, you can stay in on the action. And if you're looking for a bigger payout, you can combine your live bets into a same-game parlay. I love using FanDuel's live betting feature because every moment of the game is exciting, whether it's backing my team for a late game rally or picking a player to hit a clutch goal. I never feel like I'm missing a chance. Plus, the app is super easy to use, and when you win, you get paid instantly. Right now, new FanDuel customers can get $150 in bonus bets with your first $5 bet if it wins. Just visit FanDuel.com to join today. That's FanDuel.com for your shot at $150 in bonus bets. Make every moment more with FanDuel, the official sports betting partner of the Locked On Network. Welcome back into the Locked On Leafs podcast. Mike DiStefano, Dave Morassutti with you as we are each and every weekday, Monday through Friday. You can find the podcast free and available wherever you get your podcasts for you on-the-go listeners. And we're also available up on YouTube for the video portion of the show. So, Dave, as we were just talking about, the Maple Leafs ended the road trip with a loss, but go 3-1 on the trip. And with the loss, it brought their record to 33-20-2 through 55 games and currently sit 3 points back of the Florida Panthers for the top spot in the Atlantic Division. And they have 2 games in hand on them as well. So a chance for Toronto to still keep in lockstep with the Florida if they can, take advantage of those victories. Still got a game or two to play against Florida, if I'm not mistaken, as well between now and the end of the year. But when you look back on Toronto, you look back on the first 55 games of the Auston Matthews captaincy / Craig Berube era of Toronto. How would you say they've done so far?
I think they've done well, considering, you got a new coach, a lot of things that they're trying to figure out here. And there are disappointing issues, I guess, that have kind of crept up this year. But I think they've played quite well to expectations. I think, injuries haven't been ideal for them either. You look at the Stolars, Matthews, Tavares, they've it's not that they've been hit by injuries, they've been hit injuries to key players. Jake McCabe has missed time, right? That to me has been kind of you like to use the injury excuse, but it's every team gets injuries, but the Leafs got hit at the worst time with injuries. Yeah,
they certainly have, and a lot of depth pieces have gotten hurt as well. David Camp was out for quite some time. He had a stint on LTIR, if I'm not mistaken, so he missed a full month. Max Pacioretty has missed some time this year. There's been quite a bit of injuries all throughout the lineup for the Leafs. And I think that is the storyline.
Your mic's cutting out.
Oh, my mic's cutting out?
Yeah, pretty bad. Yeah. Well, just to go with Mike saying, like, you look at all the different pieces of the lineup, right? When you're a Leafs team that, frankly, you have a lot of money spent on the high end players, right? You're in a position where you really need to make sure that your depth is locked and key, right? I think the positive thing is you've been able to have Fraser Minton come in and play some games, right? Steven Laurent found money there as a depth forward. Like, imagine if Steven Laurent, like, the Leafs didn't have a Steven Laurent, right? You'd be relying a lot more on Ryan Reeves.
You're burying the lead when we're talking about depth, because the main story when it comes to positive storylines when you're talking about depth is obviously Bobby McMann.
Yes.
Right? Like, that's the guy we need to celebrate for who has really been the big story and wow, thank goodness we got this player through the first 55 games. Laurent's been nice. Laurent's has been a good piece, and he's done his job, but we're talking guys who've gone above and beyond and have added that secondary element of offense. Like, we take a look at Bobby McMann, like, the guy's sitting on 17 goals right now. He's fifth on the team in goals. So, Bobby McMahon's played excellent this year. And when we talk about, some positive storylines through the first half of the season, he's right up at the top, if not maybe second best story. Maybe Anthony Stolarz is the best story, but the injury kind of puts that on the back burner a little bit. But between those two, I mean, that's been a big reason as to why the Leafs are 33-22, because they've gotten, that improvement from those players. And it's made up for, the lack of scoring from Matthews, the lack of scoring from the power play, the blue line not giving you any offense. Like, those guys, Bobby McMann giving that offense, and then Stolarz making sure you can win games 2-1, 3-2, low scoring games. And you can also throw Matthew Knies in there, who's having a really good sophomore season with 20 goals himself. Like, those are probably like the biggest positives, I would say, of the initial 55 games of the season. I don't know if there's anything else that you can throw in there as a big positive story, but those.
I'll just add on Bobby McMann is just that, like, it's a good story. It's what I like is that it's a continuation of what we did from last year, right? How close that guy was to going on waivers and has now been found money.
Dude, he started the year as a healthy scratch in the press box in game 1, if you recall. And now he's a staple in the lineup who's putting his hand up and making a serious argument for getting placed in the top 6. Like, he's doing a lot of this from the third line, right?
And no power play time.
No power play time, and just driving offense from the third line, which is great. And the Leafs have needed that. But you can't take him out of the lineup, that's for sure.
No.
And you can make a serious consideration to move him up in the lineup. But you like that he's been able to generate some offense on his own from the third line and help that line create. So it's kind of why he's staying where he is.
To me, that's, in my opinion, that's more important, right? Because we know the top 6 can generate offense. It's lower in the lineup that we've seen. All right, who's going to produce it? If you move Bobby McMann up, okay, who are you moving down? Like a Max Pacioretty gets moved down. I think Pacioretty has been kind of the tweener between him and McMann. Yeah, I would say that McMann deserves the playing time over Pacioretty, but I think I prefer what the consistency of what McMann could provide that line, unless you're going to make some sort of upgrade to the third line there, where you can then move McMann up and you can kind of rejig the puzzle pieces a little bit. Because, I just like that he can do it on the third line. So when you're sending that third line out there, you at least know you're going to get something from Bobby McMann at both ends of the ice.
Right. 100%. Just where the Leafs are at, they're 15th in the league in goals at 5-on-5, so middle of the pack in goals at 5-on-5. But if you look at goals overall, they're 12th in the NHL currently. So they're starting to come a little bit, like we're seeing that increase bit by bit, because there's a while there where we were seeing 1-2 goals come out of the Maple Leafs in each game, and this Western road trip kind of started to tick those numbers up just a tad, but only allowing 2.82 goals against per 60 minutes of play, which also has them in the top 10 for goals allowed. That's at all strengths. And if you look at the 5-on-5 play, I'd imagine that that's quite significantly lower. I'm just going to double check the number there, but I would imagine that this is a team, they don't get scored on at 5-on-5 a lot. The penalty kill has been a problem recently, but yeah, fourth in the NHL, 205 goals against per 60 minutes at 5-on-5. So a negative storyline. Well, let's talk about special teams, but we'll do that on the other side. You're listening to the Locked On Leafs podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. It's your team every day.
You just realized your business needed to hire someone yesterday? How can you find amazing candidates fast? Easy. Just use Indeed. When it comes to hiring, Indeed is all you need. Stop struggling to keep your job posts seen on other sites. Indeed's sponsored jobs put your posts at the top of the page and help you reach the right candidates faster. You can go and look to hire somebody like it's yesterday. The pressure's on, and every day without the right person is a setback for your business. That's exactly when Indeed's sponsored job comes in handy. They make sure your post is seen by the right candidates right now. Now you can speed up your hiring process with a $75 sponsored job credit. Just go to Indeed.com/lockedon right now and support our show by saying you heard about Indeed on this podcast. Terms and conditions apply. Hiring, Indeed is all you need.
Welcome back into the Locked On Leafs podcast. Mike DiStefano, Dave Morassutti with you here. It's Monday night coming off of the weekend. The Four Nations about to kick off. I think on tomorrow's show, we'll kind of start to look ahead more so to what's going on with the Four Nations. I did see that Mitch Marner skating online with Connor McDavid, which is pretty sweet. We'll go more into detail about that, I think, on tomorrow's podcast. So make sure that you are downloading and keeping an eye out for new podcasts when they drop each and every day. You can subscribe to the podcast on iTunes, Spotify, wherever you get your podcasts, and also up on YouTube, of course. As we continue to look back on the first 55 games at the Four Nations break, we're taking a look at the Maple Leafs. We talked about some positive storylines that we've seen so far this season, but there's also been some negatives. Like, yes, it's been an overall pretty good season so far. Like, they're 12 games above 500, which you'll love to see if you're the Maple Leafs. But there's definitely been some negative stories. I think the injuries to Austin Matthews was definitely one. It's hurt him a lot. He only has 21 goals on the season, coming off of a year where he scored 69. So that's been a bit of a tough go. And he's gone, 6 games without a goal now leading into the break, and something he hasn't done since 2022. So there are definitely some negative storylines from all throughout the lineup. But to me, the special teams have been abysmal all year long. Yeah. And okay, the power play has started to kind of click in the last 2-3 weeks. We'll give them a little bit of a bone for that. But on the year, we're still a power play that's just that 23%, which is outside of the top 10. You're looking at the 12th ranked power play, and it is only up that high now because of a hot couple of weeks. But that's something that the Leafs definitely have to continue to do. If they don't get this power play cooking and they can't keep it rolling coming out of the break, they're going to be in big trouble, because that penalty kill, although the power play has been the hottest in the league in the last 3 weeks, the penalty kill, it's been the worst in the league in the last 3 weeks.
I think with the power play, we saw, and the difference when either one of Matthews or Marner are out.
Mm-hmm.
Because what happens on the power play? You want to get it to your best player, your best shooter. The problem is there's one puck. They got a lot of options on that power play. The best option is always to get that penalty, the opposing team to be moving around, not be like, okay, we'll just focus on Austin Matthews because that's where the puck is going. So that's how I feel like the power play, like especially against Calgary, that was probably the best I've seen that power play. It had purpose. It was moving it quick, and other guys were getting involved, right? You were getting it in the high danger areas. That's something that they've really struggled with. The penalty kill, Man, like to me, it's just a matter of they were doing so well blocking shots earlier. Now it's like teams are like, okay, they're blocking the shots. We got to create some open space so that we can get pucks in on net.
Yep.
A lot of the also just getting beat clean in front of the net too. Like the role the two guys in front are in front of the net. Make sure that there's no secondary opportunities, and that just hasn't really been the case. There's been a lot of, I think it felt times where like the two guys that are in front of the two defensemen are kind of like looking skyward because the other teams found a way to get opportunities in front there. Like if I had to guess, I would think that the penalty kills heat map is seeing a lot more goals coming in from in front of the net than from other spots, and that's an area that the coaching staff, I'm sure, will be trying to shore up.
Yeah, and over the last 10 games, just a 66% penalty kill rate for the Toronto Maple Leafs. Like, yeah, power play 39%. That's awesome over the last couple of games, but the penalty kill in that stretch has kind of negated it, and all of a sudden you're looking, it's like, well, now it's all up to 5-on-5 play at that point, and the Maple Leafs kind of a middle of the road team at 5-on-5 offense, and it drops off significantly when the injuries start to pile up, as we saw with Austin Matthews being out. Any other negative storylines that you could think of for the Maple Leafs in the first half of the season?
Well, Morgan Rielly, his play hasn't been good enough. Like, you see what it's like when Morgan Rielly's at his best. This road trip was it, right? Getting up on the rush, generating chances. When he scores, right? It reminds teams that, okay, there are guys from the blue line that can score, right? He hasn't been doing that enough. Like, you saw it on his face when he scored that goal in Vancouver.
Yeah.
Like, he knew, okay,
monkey off the back. Big monkey off the back.
Now it's like, okay, first half of the season, not great. You know what's you got an opportunity to do right now, Mo? Change the narrative a bit. You had a bad start,
baby.
Finish off strong.
Yeah.
Right. And I think also, like, I'm sorry, that third pairing, like when you look at when it's like a Simon Benoit, Philip Myers, or Simon Benoit, Connor Timmins, to me, if that's the third pairing, I think if you make a trade and you put OEL there and you figure out someone else on the right side, it's a little different. But if they don't make an addition on the blue line, I don't know how I feel about that D pairing going into a playoff matchup.
Yeah, no, it's a fair point. And I would imagine that the coaching staff and Brad Treliving feel the same way that we do. I mean, you can point blank see out there that, when it's Benoit Timmins or Benoit Myers, it's a lot of negative hockey being played, right? Like, they just have a lot of troubles killing plays and losing coverage all the time. And look, they're on the ice for more goals than they're not. I would imagine that is certainly one of the points that the Leafs are going to want to attack come trade deadline. And again, it's something that throughout the next couple of weeks, I'm sure we'll talk a lot about throughout the Four Nations as we look ahead to the deadline, which will be just a couple of weeks afterward. But I'd imagine they need to find a blue liner to fit either on the third pair or, next to Morgan Rielly. But they definitely can't not address the blue line in some capacity. Because the one that they have right now, like, yep, you like what you see out of McCabe and Tanev. Those guys have been terrific. They've been locked down, shut down defensemen, and that's, a pairing you like. But that's the only pairing you like. And you can't just have one pair, play the entire time, especially when you've got, another guy named Morgan Rielly who wants to play 20, 25 minutes a game. So they got to figure that out for sure. But definitely Morgan Rielly and his regression this year has been a big talking point, and we'll see if he can flip the script in the coming back out of the Four Nations break. He's got a few weeks to rest whatever ailments he has, and then hit the ground running, hopefully, when he returns. I think Max Domi is probably the other guy when we talk about regression and we talk about someone having a down year. Domi for sure is that. I mean, just 3 goals. He's got like 20 games without a goal again. He literally all 3 of his goals were scored consecutively. Bang, 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 like midway through the season, and he doesn't have a goal since, and he didn't have a goal prior to that either. Yeah. It was kind of wild, the season that he's had, and he had an opportunity on this road trip to go up on the top line, gifted a chance to play with Matthews and Matthew Nyes, and still couldn't muster up much offense for himself. So it'll be interesting to see what ends up happening with Max Domi going forward, because I don't see him as a matchup third liner, whether it's a center or a wing. And if he's only getting, you can't have a 3-goal scorer in your top 6. You just can't have it. I know he's a passer and a playmaker, but he's got to provide a little bit more than that, especially since guys like Nyes, guys like Matthews, they can create on their own. They don't need, the perennial playmaker with them to generate offense. Like anyone can go up there and pass him a puck realistically, but not anyone, but you know what I'm saying.
Yeah.
It's inefficient. What he's given you, for what he costs, has been very inefficient spending for the Maple Leafs. And that's a name that I kind of am pointing to and circling. If the Leafs want to make a bigger move, like we talked about, like Braden Shen, he's got a lot of money left on that deal. Money's going to have to go out if they're going to be bringing a contract like that in from St. Louis. Not saying that St. Louis would be eager to bring in Max Domi, but Toronto, you got to match the salary somehow, and that would be one.
It would help. It would help make it a little easier to make it work.
Yeah, exactly. And replace him with something a little more efficient for what this team needs. Anything else positively or negatively before we jet? Any other little shout out?
No, but I will say, because I know we're ending the show, give a little condolence to the family of Paul Morris, the longtime Leafs PA announcer from the Gardens. I only been to one game at the Gardens, so I don't really remember Morris at the Gardens. But I would remember once in a while you hear Paul Morris at Scotiabank. He would come and do a few games. But like, what was incredible from the time he started, so 1961 to 1999, he did not miss a single game.
Wow.
Talk about dedication to his craft.
Yeah.
I know a lot of Leafs, a lot of fans are gonna reminisce about the old days with Paul Morris as the PA announcer.
Yeah, 100%. Yeah, my condolences to the Morris family for sure. Tough news that I saw kind of come across the timeline earlier today. So yeah, thank you for pointing that out. All right. That'll do it for us here today on the podcast. I'd like to thank you all for listening and supporting the show. You can subscribe to the Locked On Leafs podcast on all platforms and receive daily Leafs content. Follow myself on Twitter at Mickey_Canuck. Follow Dave at D_Morassutti, and follow the show as well at Locked On Leafs. We'll be back with another episode for you guys tomorrow. We'll be digging in to the Four Nations tournament. Mitch Marner, Connor McDavid. I can't wait to dig into that line. We'll get into all that and more on tomorrow's show. Until then, keep it locked right here on Locked On Leafs.